Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Okay, welcome again, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city, or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to post any questions that you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording, as well as all resources that you see shared as links in the chat, will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all who registered. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Lastly, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week, we invite you to start off the month of May with us for a session focused on seizing the moment, closing the digital equity gap. The following week, we'll have an exciting doubleheader starting at 12:30 Eastern Time with a Crucible of Practice Salon on Strive Together and CGLR Communities, followed at 3 p.m. by Showing Up Matters for Real, Routines, Engagement, Access to Resources, and Learning. And finally, on Tuesday, May 17th at 12:30 Eastern Time, we have an exciting Funder to Funder conversation titled There's Still Time Promoting the Child Tax Credit. Registration and more information for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining me now is Sarah Torian, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesday session, Starting Early, State Investments that Support Children's Early Language and Literacy Development, a session co-sponsored by Overdeck Family Foundation. Those of us in the GLR network, and thankfully many other policymakers and others across the country, are beginning to understand what happens in the first days, months, and years of a child's life provides a critical foundation for future learning and development. 90% of early brain development occurs before a child ever sets foot in a kindergarten classroom. As neuroscience continues to reinforce the importance of these early years, state leaders are finding ways to take action to bolster early brain development as a strategy for achieving their state's education goals. And the Hunt Institute is working to support them along the way. So I am delighted to have 2 leaders from the Hunt Institute joining us today, along with 4 leaders from different states across the country who will share the why, the what, and the how of their efforts to support our youngest learners, setting them up for success in school and life. Before we begin that conversation, though, I'd like to invite Amina Fazlullah, Senior Director of Equity Policy at Common Sense, to share a few quick updates about exciting news coming out of the White House this week with regards to digital equity. She will join us as a lead presenter in next week's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar as we dig more into the opportunities afforded to those of us working to advance digital equity. Welcome, Amina.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me on. I just wanted to briefly flag for folks exciting news about the Affordable Connectivity Program, which for the first time ever is a program that is available to low-income households to connect them, to support their connection to internet service. This is a long-term program. It's a cost support program, and it's something that lots of families will be able to take advantage of to make sure that their learners have access to the internet at home. It's something that one thing that we did at Common Sense was try to find out how many folks were in the K-12 digital divide. And in doing that research, we learned there were a number of teachers and educational professionals that were also in the digital divide. And this program could potentially help them as well. So we'll be talking about it more next week, and just excited to lift that up for folks.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and also for joining us next week to share more. For those of you who want to join us for next week's session and hear more from Amina, I dropped the link to the registration page in the chat box, so you can find out more information about that. Now, to get started with today's conversation about how states can support children's development in those critical early years, I'm delighted to welcome and introduce Stephanie Sharp. Stephanie serves as a program officer at Overdeck Family Foundation, which aims to open doors for every child in the U.S. by measurably enhancing education both inside and outside the classroom. At Overdeck Family Foundation, Stephanie leads the Early Impact portfolio, which focuses on ensuring that all kids enter kindergarten ready to learn and experience early school success. Before joining Overdeck in 2017, she worked at 2 edtech companies focusing on scaling through partnerships and implementation models. And she also previously taught pre-K in Baltimore City Public Schools. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks so much to everyone for joining us today. I really don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that we're at one of the most critical moments in American early childhood policy history. That's probably something we're all very tired of hearing at this point. But really what we're seeing is that states, not the federal government, are increasingly responsible for moving the needle for kids and families. Over the last 20 years, the Hunt Institute has established itself as an invaluable support to state leaders looking to make meaningful change and progress on issues of education. Through a combination of issue education, convening, and technical assistance, Hunt has already supported multiple states to consolidate their early childhood systems, access more preschool development grant dollars, create newborn home visiting programs, and statewide advisory councils. Ensuring that our state leaders are committed to evidence-based and high-quality early childhood policy solutions is of the utmost importance at this time, which is why we at Overdeck are really excited to support Hunt Institute's work and why we really call on fellow foundations and philanthropists to join us in doing so. I can go on and on about Hunt's accolades, but I really think their work and team speak for itself. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Javed Siddiqui, President and CEO of the Hunt Institute. During his tenure, the Institute has more than tripled its staff and has expanded its scope of work to include the full education continuum from early childhood to post-secondary in the workforce. A former Virginia Secretary of Education under Governor Bob McDonnell, Dr. Siddiqui is a former classroom teacher, school principal, and school board member. Dr. Siddiqui, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks for that kind introduction. We are extremely grateful for the support of the Overdeck Family Foundation, and equally grateful for the opportunity to be with you and with all of you today for this great conversation. For those of you that may not know who we are or familiar with our work, the Institute was founded by 4-term Democratic governor from North Carolina, Jim Hunt. We're in our 20th year. We work with governors and senior electeds all over the country. Initially, we were primarily focused on K-12, and until about 6-7 years ago, when we came in, we expanded our supports to the entire continuum from prenatal to post-secondary. One of the first things we did was had a national search and look for who was going to lead our work. And we were so grateful and so lucky and so fortunate to find Dr. Dan Worry, who is now our Senior Director of Early Learning, and all the great things we've done have happened under his leadership. And just yesterday, I think one telling story before I turn it over to Dan, we had our Hunt Lead Commission of North Carolina project. We're hoping to scale to other states as we typically do. And it was a year-long focus on all things, work. How can the legislature, how can government support education, prenatal to post-secondary? And the crux of the report, so many of the findings, some of the recommendations came out from a bipartisan group were early childhood focus. And I think it really speaks to the reason we're here today. There's a lot of support in North Carolina with Republicans in regards to their third grade reading. The Senate president had a bill. It's been his sort of hallmark piece of legislation. And so the question has been, what is the starting line? Is the starting line kindergarten? And I think that the years of data are really bearing out, and that we need to consider the starting line for individual students and individual communities. And I think that's the sort of approach we bring across the country with different states. And we've had a lot of success in doing that. And we're excited to be here today. And Dan, our great senior director, is going to be facilitating and moderating this conversation. So Dan, I'm going to invite you to take it from here. Thanks so much.
Javed, thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for taking the time to join this afternoon. We are really grateful not only to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, but also to the Overdeck Family Foundation for having us kind of host this edition of the Learning Tuesday. As Javed mentioned, the sort of fundamental premise of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is the idea that third grade reading proficiency is fundamental to the long-term success of young children. I know as in the South, we call it preaching to the choir. I know that you know that third grade is thought to be sort of the demarcation between the period during which children are learning to read and after which they begin using reading to learn. So they're reading to learn after that point. In many states, this is acknowledged now in statute, with states enacting legislation that put, in some cases, some penalties even around, retention requirements for children who maybe are not reading proficiently by the third grade. But what we know is that that is not a process that begins in the third grade. It's not a process that begins in the second grade or the first grade, or even in kindergarten. As we so often hear about children coming to kindergarten ready to learn, as though that is the time that learning happens. What we know instead is that language and literacy are a continuum that begin at birth and maybe even prior to birth. I don't know if you have tuned into some of the recent research, but there are certainly research that suggests that young children begin to recognize their mother's voices, for example, even in utero. There has even been research that suggested that young newborns may recognize the theme songs of television shows that their mothers watched during the pregnancy. And so language and literacy are something that are beginning really from the very earliest days of life, and not something that we can expect that magically in third grade gets turned on and off like a switch. And so we are so excited today to be hosting a panel of state leaders who are going to share how their states are investing not only in the primary grades, but in the earliest parts of early childhood, investing in the language and literacy development of the youngest learners in their states. I am so glad to be joined today. A terrific panel of four. Susan Adams is the Deputy Commissioner at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. Her responsibilities include administration of the state's universal pre-K program, Georgia Pre-K, the preschool development grant for the state, the Birth to Five quality initiatives administered by the Federal Child Care and Development Block Grant, including Georgia's Infant Toddler Network, inclusion and behavior supports, and child and family development. We are also joined, as you can see here on the slide on the screen, by Devin Babcock. Devin is the Assistant Policy Director to Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. In this role, he serves as the lead for education, for higher education, and workforce development policy. This work includes coordinating policy development and implementation between the Ohio Department of Education, the Ohio Department of Higher Education, and the Governor's Office of Workforce Transition. And we're grateful to have Devin as well. Terry Clark is also joining us from Arizona. As the Arizona Literacy Director, Terry leads the state's early literacy initiative, which is called Read On Arizona, a public-private collaboration with a commitment among the key players in education and philanthropy to work together in coordination and alignment and share data, maximize investments, and take the strategic, comprehensive, and collective approach required to drive large-scale change change and advance statewide efforts in early literacy to improve language and literacy outcomes for Arizona's children from birth through 8. And then finally, but certainly not least, we are thrilled to be joined by Tamina Surratt. Tamina is the project director for Talk to Me, which is a unique community partnership in Gaffney, South Carolina. A native of Martinsville, Virginia, she studied at the University of Georgia and the University of South Carolina Upstate and holds a bachelor's degree in communications. During her senior year as a student at USC Upstate, Tamina was invited to attend a community meeting where officials from South Carolina First Steps to School Readiness, which is the state's early childhood agency, shared groundbreaking research on the 30 million word gap. And as a result of this initial convening, the community came together in partnership to create Talk to Me in the fall of 2015. Tamina was hired as its partnership coordinator. Panelists, I'm so glad and have been so looking forward to a chance to talk to all of you. Why don't we jump right into the conversation? For those of you who are viewing, maybe a couple of housekeeping notes. First, we will turn to you later in the hour and would encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have questions for the panelists, we will definitely be dedicating a chunk of the afternoon to taking questions from you in the audience. And as I see people are using the chat as well, please do feel free to continue introducing yourselves, but be careful. Let's try to use the Q&A so that we can keep track of questions in the Q&A function rather than in the chat, because you can see that there's quite a bit of activity there. So with that, why don't we go ahead and jump in? And Devin, I'm going to turn to you maybe to begin. Governor DeWine and the Ohio legislature, I know, have made a great commitment to early literacy in the form of the governor's Imagination Library program. Talk to us a little bit about what is Imagination Library. How did Governor and First Lady DeWine get involved in the project, and how is the Imagination Library in Ohio benefiting the state's young children?
Sure, thanks, Dan. Appreciate the introduction. And so the Imagination Library, I'm sure a lot of folks on here are familiar, is the national organization launched by Dolly Parton in the 90s. It's a book gifting program for any child, birth to age 5. And so their program relies heavily on local partners to sign up families, to engage with families, and then to also pay a small fee to cover book shipping costs. So they're sending books out to kids, and I got to admit that my kids are signed up. So every year every month, my 4-year-old is waiting by the mailbox for whatever the new book is. So the governor and the first lady experienced this themselves. Just before the governor was sworn in, their grandchildren were signed up for the program. And so knowing full well that the program relies on local partners, it was only in a handful of counties here in Ohio. There were only a handful of local partners that engaged at that point, and we were reaching less than 5% of the eligible kids in the state. And so the first lady, Mrs. Fran DeWine, is sitting there with her grandkids and looking at the newly elected governor thinking, hey, maybe this is something that we can help support and help grow. So they championed that, and in the governor's first budget, some funding was set aside with our partners in the legislature to support a 50% match. So the state is investing money in supporting local organizations in becoming affiliates for the Imagination Library. So through the Ohio Governor's Imagination Library, within a year, we'd reached all 88 counties in the state. And we are now 2 years in, serving 316,000 kids in the state every month, which is 45% of the eligible kids. So just in a short 2-year period, we've been able to engage a huge chunk of the state, and we've got local affiliates on the ground all over the state, which has been the way to do it. So they're out there at local children's hospitals, they're out there at local libraries, local organizations, local schools, engaging with families. And look, you asked a little bit, how's this working out so far? We had our first cohort study come in already, and we've seen a 15% jump in kindergarten readiness scores for kids who've been in the program for 3 years. So we, again, are excited to see some of that progress already as we get more kids signed up. And that's all been through that partnership with the state legislature and with those local partners on the ground.
Fantastic. Boy, that's really exciting. And to hear those outcomes is amazing as well. I'm interested, for those of you who are maybe learning about Imagination Library for the first time. I think it's, Ohio is not the only program that has used this as an opportunity for a sort of a cost matching program as well. It's, one of the beauties of Imagination Library is that it's something that, yes, business can get involved, but it's something, in many contexts that even individuals are getting involved in sponsoring. It's not a terribly high price point to sponsor an individual child, for example. And so, lots of places that are implementing Imagination Library, definitely implement some sort of cost matching. It's a wonderful opportunity to get, individuals and philanthropy and business involved in helping to support early literacy in the state. Devin, thank you so much. We look forward to hearing more throughout the hour. With that, I'm going to turn to Tamina Surratt. Tamina is in Gaffney, South Carolina, which Tamina, I always say, for those of us, and full disclosure, I am also a South Carolinian, and so the Gaffney is especially well known. Probably many of the people who are watching, if the name Gaffney doesn't ring a bell, the Peachoid will ring a bell. So along the interstate, there is a very famous water tower that is shaped like a peach.
Yes.
That is located in Gaffney. And if you are a trivia buff and are into Netflix, the show House of Cards featured the Peachoid very, very prominently, and the primary character there was a fictional congressman who was actually from Gaffney, South Carolina. So it's that's always great context on where in the world we're talking about. Tamina, I'm so excited to have you here as part of this conversation. Talk to us a little bit about the history of Talk to Me. Where did it come from? What has the community seen? And I know, not to be a spoiler here, but I know that there have been some really exciting outcomes here recently from the program as well. So talk to us a little bit about Talk to Me.
Yes, actually, thank you so much, Dan. I am absolutely delighted to be here today. And yes, right here in Cherokee County in Gaffney, South Carolina, with the big peach on the side of the road. And actually, Gaffney is a rather small town. We're a rather rural community. But one thing that I've learned, I've only lived in Cherokee County for about 11 years now. But one thing I've learned about Cherokee County is it's small, but it's mighty. And I think that was one of I don't know if it was a consideration in bringing the research about the 30 million word gap and the formative years for children being prepared to learn to read. But in Cherokee County, there's something about this small area where we have a lot of people who are willing to come together and basically do what needs to be done. And that's what happened with Talk to Me. A certain person who was deputy director of South Carolina First Steps at the time, but I won't call his name. I said that I wouldn't. He may be Dr. Dan Worry, but I won't call his name. But in the spring of 2015, he came to Gaffney and he connected with the director of Cherokee County First Steps, Dorothy Priester, who's watching now, hey, and shared this information. So Dorothy, who was the director of First Steps, as I said before, came together with the United Way, No 2, which is a grassroots organization in Cherokee County. And the organizations came together with the information that showed that our children, by the time they were 4 years old, there was an M-Circle assessment that was done. And it showed that the children in Cherokee County were behind the state in the areas of vocabulary identification and those things which ultimately led to reading skills. So they wanted to know, what can we do to affect this achievement gap that's being seen in early childhood education? And as a result, they came up with what they labeled Talk to Me as the organization. I was brought in the fall of that year, but those organizations in it, Cherokee County First Steps, the school district, Lisa Blanton, one of our representatives that's there, No 2, and the United Way. So they were the ones that came together. But what we have today was those organizations identified who could help us meet families where they are, because ultimately what we look to do is to empower parents, because we all know, like Dan said before, we're preaching to the choir here. So you all realize that parents are really a child's first and best teacher. So we like to come alongside the parents, partner with them, and empower them to maximize that time of when the brain is really making those connections and really growing. How can we partner with them? So now the organizations that help us to do that include Cherokee County First Steps, Piedmont Community Action, Head Start, Early Head Start, Cherokee County Public Library, Cherokee County School District, the United Way still, and we've partnered with college and university in our town, Spartanburg Community College and Limestone University, Lena, which provides a digital language processor so we can count the words and enrich the children's language environment, and the Institute for Child Success. So over the first years, and this was started in 2015, so we've spent those years doing the research, making the community aware of who we are and the need to focus on early childhood learning even before kindergarten, even as soon as 2 months old, and when they come right out of the womb. And we've started with home visiting. We have group sessions that we do through a company called Lena, and they've provided, and I'll show you real quick, this little thing that's like a talk pedometer. Oh, she said it was upside down. Our parent educator she's my wing lady, I guess, like a talk pedometer that counts the words that the children hears, the number of times that they're trying to respond. So Lena has helped us with that, but it's all in an effort, again, to get the parents to understand they have the power. So now that we've laid the groundwork for getting the word out there about who we are and offering a solution, so we help the parents recognize it's important to talk to your children, to engage them in conversation, to get them doing those what's called conversational turns. So now we want to make it a part of everyday life. They know who we are, so now we want to go where the families already are and get them to incorporate that in their everyday life, at the grocery store, at the ballpark, when they're at school. So we're just trying to get everybody talking more and engaging their little ones in conversation so that we are able to prepare our children by the time they reach school. And Dan, I could do this all day. I could go on and on. But is that...
Absolutely. It's fantastic. And I know, I mean, to me, and I would say, I told Samina, I do not give credit for Talk to Me. The community there in Cherokee County really deserves all the credit, very much including Tamina and Dorothy Priester, who are on the line here. But the role that I played, I can shed just a little bit of light about the power of having data, right? So South Carolina at the time had been looking at different ways of measuring school readiness. For a period of time, they were using a product by a company called Amplify, which Tamina mentioned was called M-Class Circle. And one of the unique things about that measure was that it included a measure in the state, for the first time that I'm aware of on a statewide basis, of vocabulary development for young children. And so no question, the way this conversation began was with, in my prior capacity at South Carolina First Steps, had access earlier than most to the data, and made the offer to the local First Steps partnerships that let's talk about your data. And Dorothy and Cherokee County First Steps were among the very first to take us up, and community stakeholders came together. They saw this data, and they saw that the children in Cherokee County, based on that data, were lagging not only kind of age level peers in the nation, but lagging in South Carolina. And so what happened next to me was really one of the most magical things about my whole tenure at that agency, was just watching this community come together around the needs of young kids. And a little bit of data was, I think, the spark that this community group around, helping parents to understand, in particular, the power of early language, right? We know, that reading is complex, but we also know that it doesn't matter to a certain extent how well you can decode words if you don't know those words. And so a rich vocabulary is a really key part of early literacy development, and something that benefits children so tremendously. So, Tamina, we'll talk more about this throughout the hour, but so excited to see where you are now, even years after the fact, continuing this great work in Gaffney. I want to turn to Susan Adams at the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning. Susan, let's talk about your work in Georgia. I know that several years ago, DECAL created what it called Lifting Infants and Toddlers Through Language-Rich Environments, or LITTLE was the acronym. These were grants that were provided around the state, and also, if I understand correctly, has a LENA connection. Tamina was talking about the LENA kind of talk pedometer. And tell us a little bit about the LITTLE grants in Georgia. Who receives them, and what results have you seen thus far?
Sure. So yes, we do use LENA here in Georgia also. We do have a grant program called LITTLE, so Lifting Infants and Toddlers Through Language-Rich Environments. And we are, our agency, the Department of Early Care and Learning, works with programs birth to 5 and supports improving quality in childcare. Mostly licensed child care programs. Those can be child care centers, or they can be family learning homes where families are paying for individuals to keep their children in a home setting. Back in 2017, we actually got funding from our governor's office as part of the grade level reading campaign here in Georgia to improve third grade reading focused on infants and toddlers. And at that time, we developed the LITTLE grants. Those grants are focused on supporting programs that really deeply and improving practice. So we use funding both from our federal dollars through our funded infant toddler specialists, and then funding from our governor's office at that time to develop a grant program. And on the next slide, you'll see that as we talk about these programs, they get a tremendous amount of support there from our agency. So they're going to get weekly coaching from an infant toddler specialist. They're getting professional development for teachers and leaders in those programs. They're going to get materials and supplies for their program. And then it's really focused on bringing these programs together to get peer support and really to support how do we increase infant and toddlers' language and literacy skills through thinking about responsive caregiving. We also use several data tools, and you'll see on the next slide, not only the LENA pedometer, the talk pedometer, to give us data about the amount of interactions that's going on in those classrooms, but we also use the classroom assessment scoring system, or the CLASS, which is a tool that really looks at the environment that the child is in. It gives us key information about the interactions, the social emotional climate of those classrooms. And as we think about language and literacy supports, we want to make sure that we're giving teachers the ability to develop caring connections with the children in their program through those literacy and language interactions, because that's what's going to make the difference. We've served in the last couple of years about 150 programs as a grant, and have got some great outcomes. So we see in these programs there's an increase in those conversational terms. That means a teacher or an adult talking to a child and they're repeating back. So we see an increase in that lobbying back and forth. We see an increase in social emotional climate in those classrooms. And then we see an overall increase in the number of words. We can say as of last May in Georgia, we could look at 250 million words that were said in those classrooms and Little Grant classrooms. And we see that teachers and leaders in this program see sustained changes in their classrooms that are linked to the data they've gotten, and they feel really supported in this program. So we're really excited about the outcomes we're getting.
Susan, that's so exciting, and I'm just looking here even at the slide on the screen and just thinking about what a great combination Lena and the class are for the state. For those who maybe aren't as familiar with the Lena device, Tamina mentioned, it is they sometimes refer to it as a talk pedometer, and it is able to track the number of words spoken. It's not a recording device though, and so is not is literally sort of ticking off the number of words from a quantitative standpoint, how much language is happening in the classroom, which is obviously very important. That the quantity of language also is correlated in most cases with the quality of the language and the vocabulary development. But then the class is such a wonderful complement to this. For those of you who maybe are not familiar with the class, it is developed at the University of Virginia, and is just this wonderful measure that is looking at classroom quality through a very different lens than the way that in some cases in recent decades we've looked at early childhood classroom quality. In many cases, what has been measured in the past is really what we refer to as structural quality, in the sense that it's looking at things like how many books are in the classroom, and what's the height of the sink, and how many times are hands washed, and all important things. But we know that that there is nothing that is more important in these classrooms than the quality of the interactions between the teachers and the children. And that's really what what the class system is designed around. It is used very extensively in Head Start programs and in states around the country. But a lovely sort of complementary duo here on the screen, and Lena in terms of its ability to sort of give data on the quantity, but then also the class looking at the quality of those interactions in the classroom. So Susan, how exciting! Thank you for sharing, and look forward to talking more about Georgia's great work here all throughout the hour. I want to turn last, certainly but not least, to Terry Clark. Terry is at Read On Arizona, and Terry, one of the things that excites me most always about Read On Arizona is that it is a collective impact model. And so maybe worth unpacking a little bit for the group what exactly that means, but a collective impact model designed to support early language and literacy. So talk to us a little bit about the structure of Read On Arizona, and the programming that you support, and the difference that we know that Read On is making for the children of Arizona.
Sure, Dan. So happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me. So Read On Arizona is the state's early literacy initiative. But as you said, with collective impact, it means it's not one program or strategy, but a comprehensive approach by hundreds of partners across the state to accelerate early literacy in Arizona. We do that through both a state level combination of state agencies and partners, as well as at the local level community collaboration through a network of Read On communities. And we agree on common goals, and we each work with a wide array of local stakeholders, including schools and school districts, local governments, early learning programs, businesses, nonprofit organizations, all committing to working together directly in support of children and families. So each applies the same strategic approach that we take at the state level, at the local level. But collective impact is really, in simple terms, it's deeper than just collaboration. It's agreeing to shared metrics and shared common vision and goals, and working not just in alignment, but really in an integrated effort. So we've collectively adopted 3 shared strategic priorities for our work around. One is teaching and learning, the other is screening and assessment, and the third, and certainly one of the most important, is family and community engagement. And so, you can sort of ask, like, what's the difference that this collective impact approach is making for the children of Arizona? And I think we can actually say prior to the pandemic that Arizona was one of 7 states that was making statistically significant progress on NAEP 4th grade reading over the last 10 years from 2009 to 2019. So we saw, that this momentum was building. We at Read On are driven by data, and we created a data tool that we call Maplet. And it's really the engine that drives our work, makes data accessible to all our partners so they can use it to inform decisions. We used that at the onset of the pandemic to lead a collaborative application for federal resources, the Comprehensive Literacy State Development Grant. And Arizona was actually awarded a $20 million grant to serve high-need communities with effective supports where they're most urgently needed. And the primary goal of that grant was to ensure that disadvantaged students have equitable access to highly effective teachers and early care and education providers that are trained in the science of reading from birth on up. And it really is meant to increase Arizona's capacity to implement high-quality evidence-based practices and strategies to support struggling readers. So I think you can sort of see our theme is that it's not one program, it's the right combination of a number of programs and collectively working together to ensure that we meet the needs of our children and families.
Sure, I love this slide as well, especially the logos at the bottom. I think sort of speak to the power of collective impact. That it's not that Read On Arizona is not just a single program. It's like you've mobilized an army of partners from around the state, kind of all pulling in the same direction for kids, which is what to me makes it so special. So congratulations on that amazing work. Let me remind all of you that, again, we will later in the hour spend some time going through your questions in the Q&A. So if you've got those, we would love for you to plug them into the Q&A function down at the bottom of your Zoom bar. I am going to, though, open up now the conversation. We had an opportunity to ask each panelist sort of an individual question. Now I want to open things up and have a little bit of a conversation among the panel writ large. So panelists, maybe if you can turn on all of your cameras, we can have a conversation a little bit together. And we started today by talking about the mission of the campaign for grade level reading, right? That we're hoping to get to that proficiency benchmark by the 3rd grade, but then kind of dug immediately into your individual programs. I want to bring us back up a little bit and just give you a chance to reflect on this question of the power of investing early in this. What do we need to do to help parents and policymakers to understand the important roles that they play, and that this is a continuum. Jerry, maybe you could start us.
Sure. So I would say nothing is more important, we believe, than to ensure our youngest learners have access to high quality early learning opportunities in those first 5 years before they get to kindergarten. So parents and caregivers, they play a key role in supporting their child's development in that way. But parents need support in building their understanding of the things they can do every day that set their child up for success. One of the reasons we really launched our Smart Talk, which is a language and literacy awareness campaign 3 years ago, was to help parents understand that continuum and where they fit, and understand not just the why and the what, but the how. We often sort of tell parents that all the things they have to do, but we don't always understand how they need that information. So I think one of the things we are really focused on is we need to listen to how parents want to get those resources, how they're most helpful to them. There's nothing really new, and the research continues to show us that the most effective family engagement strategies are what I like to say are parent informed, they're parent designed, and they're parent led. So we've really made family engagement a priority in Arizona. We have a fantastic partner network working together. I'm really proud that Arizona has a statewide family engagement center that's built on creating these model demonstration sites for family engagement and early literacy. And we have some terrific locally grown programs here in Arizona that I think are great examples of what we mean when we really engage parents in the way they want to be engaged. One of those is called Make Way for Books. I think they're one of the best kept secrets as far as early literacy. They're amazing at working with families to design sort of a menu of high quality 2-generation programs where children and parents learn together. So we're really lucky they're here. And we have many other programs like them that are really working on shoring up that, anchoring that foundational development in the early years. And families are critical.
Tamina, weigh in on the role of parents. I know that you're working, obviously very closely with families across Cherokee County. How are you helping to help them to understand the important roles that they play?
I think of quite often, I like to share about this program, and our executive director, Dorothy Priester, had said the passion that I have for this program is because it speaks directly to me. And when I had our daughters, I had not graduated from college yet. And I was faced with the idea of having these daughters who I wanted to encourage them, be all you can be, go on, get your degree, but I hadn't done it yet. And that was something that was a burden on me. And so thank the Lord, I've since graduated. But here we have a tool that in a sense levels the playing field, so that, all the research will tell you children from wealthier families, they do well. They're the ones who are on the upper level of this achievement gap that we've seen. But those from low income families, they're at the bottom. Well, we have a tool for you. Doesn't cost you anything. It's already in you, and you use this so that your child is now competitive, so that your child, by the time he or she gets to elementary school, they don't feel behind. They're right up there with the children from professional families. And so we are able to empower the families. And what we're beginning to see is that the parents are getting it. We're building the confidence of the parents because we can meet them right where they are. We can share books with the parents, and we can tell them, well, we don't have to say, well, it's okay if you don't have a high school diploma, but just right where you are. You don't have to understand all the words in the book to go through and say, oh, look at the car, look at the red car. And you're reading and you're engaging your child in conversation. So I get really excited about that because it's a tool for everybody. Nobody has to feel less than. And we're beginning to see it. Just this past weekend, we were at a concert in the park sponsored by our visitor center, and we had a table there, and we had parents who had been in the program to come up. I looked, and one parent was telling the parent, you sign up right here because we do Dolly Parton Imagination Library too. And she was like, you need to sign up for your books right here. And this is where you sign so that they can call. So they're taking ownership because they feel empowered. And that's one of the things that I love about what we do and how we do it.
So exciting. Your enthusiasm really is contagious. Devin, I talk about, obviously Imagination Library is really geared to be a parental strategy, right? It's a really pretty simple model where books are distributed directly to the home. Why is it important to get those books into the hands of parents?
I will say that my favorite thing about the books is not just that you're getting the books, but inside, if you've ever gotten them, there's a little flap that is added that says how to teach your kids about the books. How to read through with your kids, what lessons we're looking for, how to address what's in the book with your kids. And it's like a little built-in parenting lesson, which I need as much as anybody, right? So I think knowing that that's there when those books are being received by families and caregivers, that's important, that this isn't just about, putting books in kids' hands, but it's also about helping people understand how to connect with the books and how to really grow that level of learning. And I think, Dan, to some of your earlier questions, I just want to throw out there, coming from a governor's office, right? Part of this conversation about parents is just about starting to have that conversation. 5-10 years ago, we weren't even talking about how do we get parents more involved at this level of government, right? And it's all about having policymakers and supporters around you that are going to have those conversations, because I think, you mentioned this already. It's all about moving that starting line. The starting line is not kindergarten. The finish line isn't 12th grade anymore either, just to be clear, right? Right. So it's about changing that conversation for parents. Kindergarten and 12th grade, that's not school anymore. That school is everything. It starts from birth and carries on through the rest of your life. So anyway, I think it's important to have those tools out there for parents, and things like Imagination Library and other local initiatives seem like exactly where we want to be headed.
No, Devin and Tamina, I really appreciate how both of you sort of emphasize that these are strategies that are for anyone, right? That, I mean, here, Devin as a parent is, you might look and say, oh, he works in the governor's office. He, not an at-risk parent necessarily, but the truth is that every parent is a first-time parent, and every parent would benefit. And that's one of the beautiful things also about Imagination Library as a strategy, is that they, at the national level, really as much as possible encourage that this is something that be engaged at a population level in the community. It's not typically something where you can say, okay, I've got funding to pay for 12 children, and I'm gonna pay for these couple of kids. Instead, they're really encouraging, and I think we're seeing more and more of the kind of a statewide and countywide and a citywide implementation here in a way that is available and accessible to all families. Susan, what has your experience been in Georgia as you're looking at educating parents around this topic?
Right. What I would say is that it's, yes, educating parents, but it's also educating all of your stakeholders about what literacy and the foundation of literacy looks like for really young children. In transparency, when our former governor's office came to us about doing a literacy program for infants and toddlers, they had something entirely different in mind. And I was like, yes, we'll take your money, which that's always my advice to any leaders. If people have money, you say, yes, we would like that. And then you step back and, as the educator, as the parent, as the expert in the room, and say, based on what I know about young children, literacy development, families, yes, we're going to help you meet your goal, but this is what it looks like for this population or this program. So, we actually went to our governor's office and did a whole presentation that, said that this didn't look like learning the ABCs, and there would not be flashcards, that it would look like supporting our teachers, and our teachers are mostly parents too. When you think about the early learning workforce, you're primarily going to be looking at a workforce that is low credentialed, low pay, high passion for kids and families, and many of them high skilled. But they need simple tools, just like we said, families need those simple tools. They need to be told in their classrooms, you already have the skills to make a difference for these infants and toddlers in your room. And here we're going to help you hone those skills. When you're diapering a baby, you're going to make interactions. You're going to make eye contact. You're going to get that baby to go back and forth with you. Here's how you read a book with a toddler. It looks very different than a preschooler. And what we were finding in our research was, all the good work we were doing in third grade, all the work we were doing in K1 and 2, all the work we were doing in our pre-K program, and Georgia has one of the longest standing pre-K programs in the nation where kids make lots of progress. We still had kids that were behind. And so we just kept having to move back. But when you think about moving back and getting with younger children, you have to be driven by what's developmentally appropriate, what's based on where kids and families and teachers are at, and design programs that support them in those critical interactions that make a difference for reading later on. Just because we're not trying to teach infants and toddlers to read. We're not trying to teach 4-year-olds to read. We're trying to give them the skills so that when they're ready to read, which for most kids is about 6 or 7, they'll have the skills they have to be really successful at it. So it's about changing that conversation about what it looks like for really young kids and changing what the expectation is. Like, just because, you want to see certain things, you can get kids to parrot things back to you. You can get them to memorize sight words when they're really young. But the time that you devote from that takes away from key skills they need in vocabulary development and interaction. So I think everything everybody's saying here is on the same page. I think it's about making sure that it's all fundamentally based on development and supporting the people, the key people in that child's life, whether it's their child care teacher, their preschool teacher, their parent, their grandparent, the bus driver helping them get on the bus, helping them understand that these interactions, the social, emotional, making them feel comfort, helping them have vocabulary, are going to mean that you have kids that are successful readers. But you just kind of have to keep backing it up so that then kids have those building blocks. So when they do reach the doors of pre-K or kindergarten, then they're ready to move forward with what people would see as more traditional literacy skills or reading skills.
Terry, I would imagine in Arizona that you've probably had similar conversations, helping policymakers in particular to understand and helping the public to understand. I think, if we asked a group of adults walking down the street, what do you need to learn to read? They, chances are probably pretty good that they would leap immediately to, well, you gotta learn the letters of the alphabet, right? As sort of like the very first step in the process. How have you been able to work with the public and policymakers to help them really understand the issue in the way that Susan's describing?
No, exactly. I mean, I think we've really messaged 2 things. One, we've messaged it takes, at least 8 years to build a reader, and it starts from day 1, if not before. And we are consistently pushing, it's developmentally appropriate, and language is the foundational skill that reading is built on. But I think the other thing I'm really proud of is that we needed to understand how to talk about it with especially our policymakers and leaders in the community so they could make good decisions around this. So we actually created 2 years ago an Arizona early literacy policy framework. It came about informally from a state learning exchange we'd done with Mississippi. If you'll remember, I mentioned they had the most progress in 4th grade reading NAEP scores. So we learned from them some of those key elements, and one of them was very clear. We needed to focus on building educator capacity in the science of reading, and that also means we needed to build an understanding of policy leaders and practitioners in the science of reading. We needed to scale what works, the evidence-based solutions, and then we needed to really focus on high quality early learning opportunities, that we had to start talking about the development of readers before they enter school, before they get there. And what that allowed us to do, especially in the time of the pandemic and when we knew how hard early literacy was being hit by the impact of the pandemic, it allowed us to make a case and to build that understanding, and not just, again, the what and the why, but then have a plan for the how and what we should focus on, and be able to point to other states that we learned from. So we were very successful in that 2-page policy framework, being able to sort of frame the conversation and help policy leaders and our governor's office and our state legislature make good decisions around how some of those investments could be made. And so to date, over $100 million in new early literacy investments, thanks to the efforts of all those key partners, especially the governor's office, Arizona Department of Education, First Things First, our early childhood state agency, our state board of education, and our Department of Economic Security, all helped by allocating and then really being committed to successful implementation, focused on these shared early childhood and education priorities that we identified in our policy framework.
That's exciting. I want to remind everyone that we are going to go here in just a minute, actually, to the Q&A. You're asking your questions of the panel. Before we do that, I want to ask one more question. And Tamina, I hate to put you on the spot, and so please feel free to. I think I've already learned that I probably can't put you on the spot awkwardly. You're pretty smooth at this, but I know that that one of that a doctoral student at North Greenville University recently did, and I don't know if it's published sort of fully yet, but did her doctoral research on the Talk to Me program. I didn't know if you were able maybe to tell us a little bit about, at a high level, what are some of the findings that came out of that study?
And her name is Dr. Jody Deal. And you were a part of the webinar that was done by Lena, which is the company that sponsors the little talk pedometer we talk about. And you can rewatch that webinar. You can register to stream it on Lena's website, lena.org. And and I knew I wouldn't remember all of the stats, but I did go and pull it up because they have like a little blog about it. And it's Dr. Jody Deal. And again, she went in and she sampled children who had been through the Talk to Me program using either Lena home visits or Lena Start, which is the groups. And it said that there were a higher percentage of children from the Lena sample who scored in the highest KRA range, demonstrating readiness. So this was the goal, to improve our children's readiness, because remember, I was telling you all about the M-class test that they had taken, showing that the children in Cherokee County were behind the state and even behind the nation. So her research pretty much proved that the program is doing what we want it to do. She said it also had a lower percentage of children from the Lena sample scored in the lowest KRA or kindergarten readiness assessment range of emerging readiness, and that more active parents' participation was in the Lena program. And the higher their children, so the children that were more active in Lena, that the children whose parents were more active in Lena showed as being, their scores were higher on the KRA assessment. And it's all there. They have the blog, and again, that's on the Lena website, and you can see the webinar and also just look at the blog and see those results. But we were super duper excited about that because, again, it did prove that we are being successful in what we're trying to do.
That's so exciting, and I definitely encourage everybody to go check that study out, because just an exciting outcome for the folks in Cherokee County, and informing all of our good work around the country. Let's jump into some of the audience Q&A here, and it's interesting. Tammy has almost exactly the question that I wanted to follow up. I know when Terry was talking earlier, Terry, you mentioned that that you needed to incorporate sort of parent voices on the best way to actually reach parents. And so Tammy is asking really for the whole panel. So please, everybody, weigh in. Oh gosh, where did it go? Did it get answered? I was going to read her question. I think it just disappeared. But basically, she was asking, what is the most effective tool for parents to? I mean, what have you found, Terry, when you said parents need to inform that? What have you found in Arizona in terms of like what gets to parents better than is there a method that has enabled you to contact them and have that outreach better than others?
So I'm going to disappoint you, Dan, in that there is not one way. It is whatever way the parents say works for them, right? And so for some, it's been, some great texting communication, and then creating sort of either virtual networks where they can connect and create a circle where they feel comfortable and learn with a group that together. For others, it's been, more the workshops and hands-on. And for others, we're still learning, to be honest with you. We're excited to be doing some more parent pilots funded by a national grant that will really have parents designing with us from the very beginning. And what we're learning is that it depends on the parents. It depends on where, rural versus urban. So we need to get really good at making those menu of options and the way we deliver parent supports and resources really work for them, and listen to that voice all the time from start to finish.
Great. Let me open it up to the rest of you panelists. Is any, certainly I think Terry's message around individual families needing to sort of decide what is the most effective method for them. Is there any place, Susan, that maybe you found particularly effective? Or
So one of the things that we have been piloting, for a lack of a better term, with our preschool development grant is developing what we call family peer ambassadors. So they are family members, wide range, dads, mothers, grandparents from lots of different backgrounds who have a child or a child that recently exited within the last 2 years in an early education program. So they could have a child that's in our Georgia pre-K program, maybe a child in early Head Start or early intervention. Maybe they're a parent who has a child care scholarship. And we work with them and actually train them to be ambassadors with their peer groups. They're trained on different services. They're really taught to how to facilitate parents navigating the early childhood system. So I have a question. They're trained in developmental milestones with the program from Learn the Signs Act Early, and how to support understanding your child meeting the milestones and using resources to support that. And then they're also trained to do social media posts on behalf of the agency too. So they do face-to-face events, they do trainings, and they do social media posting, and we actually pay them for their time. And so, because what we hear, what we know, and what research is telling us is that families look to other families for, especially young families, look to their peers for support. So we've developed this program that we're still figuring out that supports family members in being that tool and being someone who has the right information or knows how to go find it. Because what we find is a lot of families are turning to social media, and maybe some not what we would feel like we're the best experts. And so they're trained in how do you look up and find licensed childcare? Why is it important to choose childcare that has a license? How do you understand our rating system? How do you support, reading development? And but it's from someone from their own community, or maybe someone that has a child like their child. And so we're finding that to be really effective because what we find is parents really don't want to talk to the state lady. They want to talk to someone that looks and looks like them, has the experiences they have, and are from their community and understands the experiences that their family's going through.
Great. Two similar questions in the chat that maybe I'll combine in the interest of time, but they relate to technology. Terry, you might be a good resource to kick this off. The question said, I love the use of Lena is really fascinating, but notes that parents, being a parent is a difficult and tiring job, and that parents can feel very much overburdened. And so there's a question about whether there is research or kind of our feelings, the panelists' feelings about using technology, using interactive smart devices in some cases to help with the idea of conversational turns. So ultimately the question is, does it have to be a person, or can it also be a technical sort of innovation?
So my off the top of my head response and what research I think when we have looked at this says that it's always about the adult and the child and the relationship and the connection. And any technology or a book or any of those things are all the tools that help support that relationship and that connection. And if we start thinking about it any other way, we're going to actually take away from what research says is the most important thing, which is that relationship and that connection that engages the child with the adult and actually produces what we all want to know, what we all see as the learning moment. So.
Great. Anyone else want to weigh in on the technology question?
Okay.
I was just going to say, I think it's something that people in the birth to 5 field are really having to figure out. I think the pandemic really kind of escalated that. Terry is right. Young children learn from interactions with other people. So with their peers, with their families, with their teachers. But on the flip side, technology is part of their world and part of their family's world, and it's a tool that families find effective. And so how do you support people in using it as a tool to enhance the interactions? Because it's not going away, and then put help families and teachers understand the appropriate kind of guardrails. It's not a replacement. It should have limitations. And how do you use it appropriately? An interactive book is not like sitting down and watching TV. It's meant to be enjoyed with an adult helping that child go through it or talking about it. But also, we cannot simply continue to say as early educators, children don't need screens, because that's not a realistic thing to say, and it makes us seem, to be quite honest, a little bit tone deaf to what's going on. So absolutely, Terry's right, interaction, but also realistic about how do we support people in doing it in appropriate ways.
Well said, Susan. I think you're absolutely right too, that the pandemic has shifted this conversation a little bit. I mean, I think historically the answer to that question within the early childhood world has been very much a hard no, right? That this has to be a one-on-one interaction, and for I think it was interesting to watch the field say for years there's no such thing as virtual pre-K, and then lo and behold, here we in many states found ourselves in exactly that for a year or more. So it's an area that I think we're all still learning, and some of the research may still be
I
out.
would say, Dan, 2 years ago, as a former preschool teacher, as a director of a state preschool program, I would have said, no way, no how. And I still have reservations. Kids need to be in classrooms. But I will say that teachers and families have risen to the occasion. And there's been a lot of really fabulous things that we've learned about technology, and we should not leave them to the wayside as we move forward and focus on and place priority on in-person experiences for children, but do not forget what we learned about our virtual experience.
Absolutely. And Tamina, just to clarify for the audience, maybe the Lena device, while it is an electronic device and is wearable, is not an interactive device in the sense that it's not something that you're actually having a conversation with.
Yes. So it has a little screen, but the little screen just gives like digital information. So the child just wears this, and it is like the pedometer not your Apple Watch, but like just the old school pedometer that only counts the steps. But the interesting thing is, one set of data that we collect with the Lena digital language processor is the amount of electronic noise in the background. So the feedback that we get from the Lena device is the number of words that a child hears in the day, the number of conversational turns, or the number of times that they attempt to talk back not like my teenagers talking back, but to respond. And also the electronic noise in the background. So we work with the parents to increase the words they hear, increase their conversational turns, but decrease the electronic noise in the background. So we don't try to tell the parents, oh, take that device out of their hand. Like Susan was making a good point, because the second you tell somebody, oh, you don't need to do that, that's the exact thing we want to do. I think that might be human nature or something. So we try to incorporate that. But your score looks better if we can decrease that electronic noise, if we can decrease the amount of television in the background, if we can decrease the amount of time that the child spends in front of the phone, because it'll pick that up. So the child is wearing this on a little vest on their chest, a little tiny one. It goes in the pocket on their chest. So when they're engaging on the phone, it's there, and it's monitoring that background noise also. So
Roger's got a great question in the chat. Maybe Devin, we could start with you a little. I know the Imagination Library has done its best to incorporate, but the question is, can the panel, so everybody jump in on this too, but can the panel speak to best practices for working across cultures with bilingual and authentic ethnic voices in both achieving academic attainment and successful community partnerships, and in particular, the idea of multi-generational education?
Sure. Well, Dan, as you mentioned, we're blessed with a great partner, Imagination Library, right, who does an incredible job of book selection and book placement. So we're thrilled to have that kind of resource available to us. But as we grow that program and other early literacy programs, right, it's all about local partners for us who can help us bridge that gap. We can't do any of that from this office tower I'm in Columbus, Ohio. That's got to be all on the ground. So that's our children's hospitals, that's the United Way, that's all of our local organizations that we're able to work with through programs like the Imagination Library. Got to find those local folks on the ground. It doesn't matter what part of the state we're talking about here. There's folks on the ground that know more about their neighborhood and their city than we will. So for us, it's all about finding great partners. And I see that Sarah's added to the chat one that I love to brag about, which is the United Way of Summit in Medina County. Which is one of our local partners that we went out and found early on in this process and said, hey, look, you know your neighborhoods better than we will. Help us get on the ground and sign parents up. And that's how you make the jump from 5% of kids to 45% of kids in 2 years, right? Is through those kind of outreach partnerships.
Terry, no question that all states are increasingly diverse, but Arizona has a unique sort of population with a large Spanish-speaking population, a large Native American population. How are you at Read on Arizona dealing with some of these questions around early literacy development with bilingual and various different cultural voices being added into the conversation?
Sure. I think that one of the things that we really focus on has already been said, which is really the local communities know their neighborhoods the best. And so working with those local partners to then identify what families need, especially in the 0 to 5 years here in Arizona, we talk about, and I've said it before, language development is sort of the foundational building block to early reading success. And so, we try to encourage families to lean into the language that they speak at home, and to really, set their child up for success by having those rich conversations. But, we also need to understand and really get to know the communities and the families that our providers are serving. I think there's we're learning every day how to be more culturally responsive and appropriate with with some of these things. And so a lot of the time it's just as simple as listening and then reaching out to experts who serve those families well and really leaning into what they already do.
Absolutely. Question in the chat from Mary that probably is appropriate for both Tamina and Susan. It's about Lena home visits. And Mary's asking, what is an example of what does a Lena home visit look like? What happens in practice on a sample home visit? Tamina, is that something you want to talk a little bit about?
Sure. Now with the Leaner home visits, I will say first, they're not very long, which is good for the parents that we serve. But during that time, we give the parents the tools. They have what they call the talking tips. And these talking tips will help the parents to make their conversations with the children more effective. So they'll typically go over a talking tip for that day. They'll focus on a particular one. Our parent educator is running to me right now. Thank you. You got to have a good team, y'all. So they have talking tips. An example, talk about what you're doing and thinking, comment on what you're doing or look at, name things. One of them that I like is they talk, number 4, get down on the child's level. And so each week they'll focus on one of the talking tips and she'll help the parents to incorporate it in their daily life. So if it's get down on the child's level, they'll talk about, okay, how can you do that when you're having conversations with them? What will you need to do? Yeah, and so did I answer? I'm sorry. Did I answer it?
Good. Isn't anything you want to add on the Lena program?
So most of our work has been focused with teachers and childcare settings, but the same kinds of things that Tamina said. Lena has lots of good supports on how to engage people working with kids, give them simple tips. We work with practice-based coaching, which is fancy to say we work with a teacher and she chooses a goal that she wants to practice. I'd like to increase lunch. I've noticed on my Lena report, kids aren't talking a lot during lunch. This was a situation in a 2-year-old classroom. She noticed on her report around 11 o'clock, there wasn't a lot of talk in her classroom, and that was lunch. And she realized that because they fed their kids in separate high chairs, they didn't really, and they were focused on kids getting food, being busy. They redirected their classroom where at lunch, they began to serve lunch family style at small tables with kids. Teachers sat at the table with the children and they talked with them. And of course, their scores went way up. Same thing with families. We're actually doing a family, some coaching right now with our own employees at state agencies that have young children. Our agency is going to be doing coaching with them. And they're not going to do them through home visits. They're going to do them in cohort groups through Zoom because we have someone from our governor's office participating. We're looking at them. We're looking at people in our agency because then they've had the experience of what it really means with their own child to increase their vocabulary, to increase interactions. And then they'll take that back to their work and their experiences. And so it really is, Lena gives you a lot of really good tools that they developed through research that can be used with parents and with teachers.
Great. Our time is beginning to wind down. We've got about 9 more minutes, and so we'll get to as many of these questions as we can. Did want to flag for you at some point here. Oh, look at that! As if on cue, the evaluation of this session is going to pop up on your screen. So please, we'll continue while you share how amazing this panel has been. Such great panelists. Terry, question from Beth in the chat about could you talk a little bit more about the Make Way for Books program?
Sure, and I encourage and thank you for putting their link in the chat. I encourage anyone to check out their website. But again, they really approach neighborhood by neighborhood, and they've created programs like the Story Project, and it almost as if the parent and the child go through the program together. They graduate together. Younger siblings come into the program and the family goes through the supports and resources together, and they're focused on ages 0 to 5. And one thing I will share, if you're not, we're lucky that it's homegrown here in Arizona, but they have built this amazing app that is free called Make Way for Books app. It has fantastic bilingual ebooks on it that are written by local, national, and actually authors from around the world that have submitted their books. And And it very simply, again, takes that, the app is considered a tool that a parent can use to help support their child's reading, and suggests activities as they're reading. So it really makes it sort of an interactive but engaging, but parents are right there with the tool in their hand, so they can do it successfully. But Make Way for Books has that, and then these very focused neighborhood 2-gen programs. And we're lucky enough, they started in Tucson. We've now expanded them up here to Maricopa County, and we want to continue to see them and other amazing early literacy programs we have here in Arizona scale and expand.
That's great. Well, we're getting close, and Valerie has a great question in the chat that may be a good one for sort of everybody to have a final comment on. She says, our community is beginning to plan an early literacy summit to move forward with a community plan to boost literacy for young kids. What are some of the lessons learned when your state or community began this process? So thinking back, to when you maybe began this process, what advice would you have for those in the audience who maybe are thinking about how to incorporate more early childhood strategies into their own literacy initiatives? Maybe we can kind of just go around the group. Devin, can we start with you?
My advice to everybody always is find allies. There's a ton of them out there. So go find some friends. For us, that was funders on the outside. That was people who were interested in early literacy work and wanted to get involved early on, and people who had been excited about the Imagination Library in the past and knew that we had to get to all 88 counties and all of our kids, right? So for whatever that thing is that you want to do, I'd say go find those allies, legislators, local government leaders, business community, public-private partnerships, nonprofits. I guarantee that there are folks out there who want to walk with you in that journey.
And speaking of partners, Terry, seems like an apropos time to turn to Read on Arizona. What are some of the lessons that you would share?
Wholeheartedly, literacy champions is key, and collaboration, building it from the start is important. I think the other thing that I wish, we could have really messaged and from the beginning, and I think anyone trying to get this started now should think about, there's no silver bullet to improving early literacy and language, and starting early is as close as you get, but it's still, there's no one approach, no one program that's going to get you where you need to go. It is a comprehensive approach, which means why you need multiple partners and you need cross-sector support and alignment. So I think that and then always leaning into the data. Don't just do a strategy or a program because someone else is doing it. Make sure it's what your community that you're working on, data is showing that's what's needed, and that will get you a long way to where you want to go.
Great. Susan, what are your lessons from Georgia?
So I agree with Terry about looking at the data, but I think data is a place to start. Make sure you continually collect the data to support that what you're doing works, not only for yourself, because we've had some really good ideas over the years, and maybe they didn't work so well. So make sure you pay attention to that, but then also to build your case so that you can go to legislators, so you can go to funders and say, look what's working. Look at how Tamina Test talked today about their KRA data. And then I would also say, think about the places where children and families are and make sure you're engaging them. Engage childcare, engage school age and after school programs. Your local school systems have a huge amount of support. So how do you bring all those places where kids and families are and marry them with those partners like funders and legislators, and then continue to make sure that what you're working is getting you the outcomes that you intended to, and be clear about what those outcomes are. Where do you want to get?
And Tamina, we'll give you the last word. What advice would you share?
I think what I have to share will really echo what most of the other panelists have said today. So I've been working with our executive director at Cherokee County First Steps, Dorothy Priester, for about 6.5 years now. And one thing that I've learned from her is the importance of relationships. if she's going to do business with you, at some point, she's going to want to look you in the eye, shake your hand, post-COVID, but but she wants to shake your hand, maybe have a meal with you and form a relationship. And that is so important because, yes, the partners are what have made Talk to Me the success that it is now. We have partners who have even supplied, before we were even able to recruit, well, they supplied the families that we needed to get started. So I want to echo that sentiment, build those relationships. And once you've built the relationship with the stakeholders that can help you, then build the relationships with your target client, the families that we want to serve. Go out into the community, because although I know it's a little outdated to actually go out, shake hands and make friends, but it still works. Some of the old stuff still works. So when we go out to a concert in the park and we meet those families and we smile at their babies, we're building those relationships so that those parents in turn will come to us and they'll begin to speak our message and share it with other families. So like they've all said, the partnerships, the relationships are key.
Don't think we could end on a better note than that. I want to thank the panel, Devin Babcock of the Office of Ohio Governor Mike DeWine, Tamina Surratt of the Talk to Me Initiative at Cherokee County First Steps in Gaffney, South Carolina, Susan Adams of the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, and Terry Clark of Read On Arizona. Panelists, thank you for taking time to be with us. What a great conversation. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. And Sarah, I think we'll turn things back over to you to wrap things up.
Thank you so much. Ditto what Dan just said. Thank you all. This was a great session, and huge thank you to you, Dan, for helping to plan it, finding this wonderful panelists, and bringing this session all together. So many insights, parents, partners, meeting families where they are, relationships, using data to make the case. This has just been such a powerful conversation. Thank you all. Thank you to all of you who joined in with me and listened to these amazing insights from our panelists. I hope you will make plans to join us for more great GLR Learning Tuesday sessions. We've got a number of those up on the page right now, including next week's session with Amina Fazlullah, talking about all the great opportunities to close the digital learning gap, advanced digital equity right now. And then also there's lots of talk about Lena in today's session. So in addition to the great sessions that we've got listed on this slide, just want to make sure everyone knows that on May 17th, we'll be partnering with the Overdeck Family Foundation again, and we'll be including leaders from Lena in that conversation, so we can get more details on the nuts and bolts and opportunities for really utilizing this technology to promote conversational turns and build children's early language development. Thank you all again. Thanks again to our amazing panel, to all of our attendees, and stay tuned for a follow-up email that will come in the next week. It'll include a link to this recording. If like you, there were so many insights you need to, like, if you're like me, need to go back and watch it again to reinforce those points. And also all the links that were shared in the chat box will be in that email. So stay tuned for that. Hope that you'll all join us for more GLR Learning Tuesdays, Funder to Funder and Crucible practice sessions. And until then, thank you all again. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.